Hello, my name is Jessica and I am an au pair in France. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between au pairing in a small French town in the south versus au pairing in Paris. I spent 6 months au pairing in the south in a little town called Albi. If you are curious about what Albi's like, what the day-to-day life is like there, you can watch my video Day in the Life in Albi. Currently, I am in Paris. I just moved up here. I've been here a little bit over a month au pairing. So I've finally gotten a feel for kind of the general vibe of life here versus the experience of au pairing in the south. Paris is, like people often say, the New York City of France. It's the biggest city. It's actually not the oldest city. That goes to Marseille's, the second biggest city in France. The life you experience in Paris is going to be very different from the life that you experience almost anywhere else in France, and that's because it's Paris. It's just like how living in New York City is going to be very different than living in some small town in the Midwest of the United States. Most of the differences come back to that small town versus big city difference. So, right off the bat, the amount of people here in Paris is obviously a lot higher than in Albi. Making friends is easier, dating is easier, and the biggest difference I would say for an au pair is that there is a huge au pair community in Paris. The first weekend of September, for example, I went to a picnic in Champ de Mars, which is a park right in front of the Eiffel Tower, and there were about 200 au pairs at that picnic. A couple weeks later, I went to the same picnic. It happens every week in September, and there were still about 100 au pairs there. I am in so many WhatsApp groups, some for au pairs that like bookshops, some for au pairs that are older than 22, the senior au pair group. I am in groups for thrifting, girls who like thrifting. So many different groups. I never lack anything to do. On any day, I kid you not, on any day, I could always find someone to do something with. I can go into any of the groups and put, hey, I want to go thrift shopping. Hey, I want to go to this bookstore. Who's interested in coming along? And I have yet to have a situation where I have to do anything alone. A lot of times it's like 5, 10, 15, even 20 au pairs meeting up and all getting lunch together in a park or going to a cafe or going to explore a certain area. And that is a huge luxury of living in Paris. Another luxury of having a huge au pair community is that there's always going to be people to help you out with your problems and who understand what you're going through. A lot of times when, I'm with a group of au pair and we're getting drinks or we're out having a picnic, we're talking about all of the issues that we are dealing with and giving each other advice on behavioral issues, on how to bring up things with our host families, on what we should expect from our host families, on what we want out of our circumstances, on language classes, on what activities we should get involved in. It's a huge benefit being surrounded by other people who are doing the same thing as you. Another difference of au pairing in Paris is that you're going to have a lot more options when it comes to families. That is often going to result in more pay. Also, because Paris is more expensive, honestly, you should be getting paid more than if you were au pairing in a small town where everything is less expensive. But as far as finding a family with a certain type of accommodation or with certain hours or certain ages of kids, that's going to be a lot easier to do in Paris than in any other city in France, especially the really small cities. There's only going to be a couple of families probably looking on the big platforms of like Au Pair World. But in small cities, you might find that there's actually no one actively looking for an au pair. In Paris, it is very doable to find a live-out situation where the family rents a separate apartment for their au pair. Now, this apartment is going to be, in almost all cases, what you call a chambre de bonne, which is just basically like a studio with a shower, sometimes not even with a stove and an oven, like very, very small room. I honestly prefer living in with my very nice big room and accommodations. I can talk about live in versus live out and why I've chosen live in for both of my situations in a different video, but that's another thing to consider if you really want to live out. Paris is probably going to be one of the only places you can do that. Let's talk about small towns. Obviously, there's less people. If you like that small town vibe, then that can be a pro for you. There's a slower pace of life in small towns, and then this also relates a little bit to the South, I think. Yeah, in Paris, people are rushing around. It's not like in America. Like, people are still a lot more chill here than in America, I find, with their work life and how much they're actually doing in a day. I still keep a way packed schedule by French people standards. When I tell French people what I'm doing in a week, they're like, oh my god, you're exhausting yourself. Life in Paris is oftentimes going to be slower than life in the US, especially if you, like me, were working in a big city before and working in an area where there's not so much emphasis on work-life balance, then even Paris will still feel slow compared to that. But compared to the South, or if you're coming from Spain, or Portugal, like a Southern European country, Paris is probably gonna feel very fast-paced for you. Last point on small town versus big city is, to be honest, yeah, any small town, I think, in France, not any small town, but most small towns are going to be a lot prettier than Paris. I think Paris has its beautiful aspects to it, but I was living in Albi before this, and it was like a little fairy tale village, and had like 2 things that made it a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Strasbourg, Colmar, those are so freaking beautiful. Even like Nice, it has a very distinct style. Paris, you're gonna see some of the things that tend to happen in big cities with old historical buildings getting ripped down and like new modern buildings being put in, and kind of like this mishmash of different styles. You're not gonna just be able to walk anywhere and have it look very, very French, very like what you imagined France to be like, versus if you go to a smaller city, then you can live somewhere that everything is just going to be so coherent and beautiful. So those are some of the differences between au pairing in Paris and au pairing in Albi that I have found so far. I wouldn't necessarily recommend one above the other. I think that if you're a very social person, there's going to be a lot of advantage of coming to Paris if you want to meet lots of other au pairs. If you just want to be able to say that you've lived in Paris, like, obviously Paris is going to be the place for you. If you have a hard time selling yourself to host families, Paris, because it's a much bigger market, also might be an easier place for you. That being said, there's also a lot more demand for au pairs that want to like live in Paris, so perhaps it's a little bit more competitive as well. It's hard to say. I think that it's really valuable if you're really looking to explore France to get both experiences, to live different places in France. One of my friends, her host family in Paris didn't need her for the summer, so she went and spent a month with a host family down in the south of France. And even doing something like that, spending a month, 3 months, a short amount of time in the south of France will really help you understand the French culture more and just get a feel for the different ways of life and the differences between the different parts of France. So if you enjoyed this video, if you want to learn more about living in France, about au pairing, about travel in general, please hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more videos. Bye!